Members of the 117th Congress convened Sunday in what could be remembered as the most unconventional congressional opening in history. Vice President Pence administered the oath to returning senators and newly elected members. Hundreds of House members also gathered in the Capitol to take their oaths. Republicans flipped more than a dozen seats in the November election, but Democrats managed to keep control of the House. However, they have the narrowest majority of either party in 20 years, beginning the season with 222 members, just 4 more than the 218 needed for a majority. One race in New York is still undecided. For more on all of this, I want to bring in CBS News political contributor Molly Hooper. Molly, first of all, Happy New Year. Great to see you. Let's get right
into it.
Happy New
Year to you, Lana.
Each party is Thanks. Each party is facing some serious internal divisions. Let's start with Republicans. A dozen senators and more than 100 representatives say that they are going to challenge the presidential election results when Congress meets on Wednesday. There are several reasons that this will go nowhere, but the fact that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has written it off is an important sign, I think. Tell us a little bit more about what you see in these moves and if you think McConnell has lost control of his party in Congress.
Well, Mitch McConnell is in sort of a tough position because on the one hand, there are a number of Republican senators who are eyeing a run for president in 2024. And you may recognize a few of their names out there, CBSN viewers. Ted Cruz, who already ran for president, but might be looking at another run. Josh Hawley, Missouri, who has made a name for himself for his first 2 years in the Senate as a conservative Republican, outspoken Republican, and a big Trump defender, and a number of other Republican senators who represent states that feel that that the vote wasn't necessarily on the level, and so these senators do plan to formally contest elections from a handful of states, and we'll see how that plays out, obviously, on Wednesday. But in terms of whether Mitch McConnell has control of his caucus, he has those senators who are huge Trump loyalists and have huge Trump bases, but he also has a number of other Republican senators that are up for re-election in 2022, and he has to watch out for their best interests as well. So right now, Mitch McConnell is in sort of a tricky position because, on the one hand, he has to really bolster and support those incumbent senators who are up for re-election and may not necessarily represent states that are as vociferously pro-Trump as others, and so he's caught in sort of a tough position, and not wanting to rock the boat a whole lot. It's one of those situations that we will see how it plays out in the next few months. But as of now, it looks like his position in power is pretty firm. But again, contending with those Trump voters and Trump supporters and disaffected voters who feel that the election wasn't fair, he also has to manage that as well in his party.
It's been interesting to see him trying to navigate that. All right, Molly, let's move to the Democrats. Despite a shrinking Democratic majority in the House, Nancy Pelosi is likely to win re-election as Speaker. She's also announced that she is not going to seek the speakership again after this. We know that there's nobody really who has lined up to try and challenge her gavel in this go-round. But what do you see in terms of the future for Democratic leaders in the House of Representatives?
Well, I thought it was very interesting because the House just started voting on the Speaker. And that's where each individual who's a member of the House has to actually get up and say who they support for Speaker. It's an actual vote, a roll call vote, where the members say either Kevin McCarthy, Nancy Pelosi, depending on which party you're in, or to some of those Democrats who voted against Nancy Pelosi back in 2018, they might say another name. But it is a very interesting process to watch. However, what Nancy Pelosi has been up against this time, it's not a group of disaffected Democrats who want more young blood in the leadership. She says on a recent phone call that she had with Democratic members of her caucus that her big enemy is coronavirus. Because again, remember, this is not like the other votes in the House of Representatives. This is not like you stick your card in the slot and you punch aye, nay, present. You actually have to be physically present in the chamber. And there's about 24 Democrats who have regularly missed votes, even though they've been recorded as voting because of the remote voting system that the House has instituted over these past few months dealing with during the COVID crisis. And that's just not going to be the case when it comes to the speaker vote. And the challenge there is it doesn't matter if the Democrats are in control of the House or the Republicans are in control of the House. It's the individual who has the most votes, a majority of the votes at the end of the first round of voting, who wins speakership. So, for example, if not enough Democrats showed up to vote for Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy could become the next speaker. Now, that's not likely to happen, but it's been an issue that Nancy Pelosi has been sort of wrangling with over these past 2 or 3 weeks, as some members of her caucus have either tested positive for COVID or have been exposed to COVID. It looks, though, like she is going to have enough votes at the end of the day. Well, we'll find out at the end of this day, because at the end of this day is when we'll find out likely who the next speaker is. But, moving forward, I think that she's going to face the same challenges that she's faced over the past 2 years, a very diverse Democratic caucus with progressives growing in strength and conservative or more moderate voices not as strong. And since the margins in the House are so close this go around, with 222 Democrats to 211 Republicans, we might see some interesting alliances form whereby some Republican votes moving forward could actually win at the end of the day. And the way that Nancy Pelosi is going to, manage her caucus will be fascinating to watch, because again, there are almost a handful of Democrats who were just elected. They were elected because they defeated Democrats in the primaries. Individuals like Eliot Engel, who was defeated in his primary in New York. So it'll be fascinating to see how she does this.
Interesting, too, to see as other people start to jockey for successorship. Molly, I want to talk to you about that veto. Both houses of Congress overturned President Trump's veto of a defense bill early on in this week. This is obviously the first time that the Republican-controlled Senate has voted against President Trump in an effort to overturn his veto. Is there a sense that the president is less of a factor in his last few weeks in that remain in the administration? Was this really the Republicans saying that they are starting to separate their party and the future of the Republican Party from President Trump?
Well, Lana, it's interesting that you asked that question, because on the one hand, you'd think, yes, that's what this means. But I'm not sure that it does, because if you go back to that first question you asked me about the Electoral College and the Republicans who are breaking away, there's nearly a dozen Republican senators who are going to be joining almost, more than 100 or some odd House Republicans in contesting the various Electoral College results from various states. I mean, that says a lot about the hold that the president has on the Republican Party. And, even though he won't necessarily be taking a lot of actions, executive actions, or maybe he will, that would be upheld in the next administration, the amount of influence and impact that Donald Trump has on Republicans moving forward will be very interesting to watch, because he does. I mean, the fact that so many Republicans are essentially, balking their own Senate GOP leader, Mitch McConnell, who really did not want to have this fight over the Electoral College results. He really didn't want to have it, because it puts all of the members of his caucus in a tough in a tough situation, because at the end of the debate in each chamber of the Electoral College, all members will have to vote on whether to certify or not certify each state's Electoral College results. And that just puts Republicans in a tough spot. And how Donald Trump reacts to those votes, and whether he tries to insert himself into races incumbent races like a John Thune from South Dakota, who has essentially said that the Electoral College votes will be certified and Joe Biden's the next president. Well, that really ticked off Donald Trump, who essentially said, come on, we got to primary John Thune. So again, I think that the president will have influence within his own party, but in terms of, how much he can actually get done in these last few days, I'm not sure that as much will get done as probably he would like.
All right. One last question for you, Molly. As I mentioned earlier, I know you and I are both very interested in what's going to happen in Georgia come Tuesday. Obviously, this pair of Senate runoff elections in Georgia is going to determine which party controls the Senate. But not just that, it's going to determine how successful or stymied the Biden administration is in the first half of the term of their presidency. I'm wondering if you have been watching this race, if you feel like President Trump's conflicting messages in some ways about whether or not the election can be counted on in Georgia to be safe and secure and legitimate will hurt Republican voters and potentially ultimately end up giving Democrats the control of the Senate.
Well, that's the billion-dollar question there, Lana, because, I mean, if you listen to Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, he pretty much concedes that, at least one of those two races will be lost to Republicans. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen, but Democrats are kind of writing off at least one of those races. And it's unclear what role Donald Trump will play in voter turnout and how successful each candidate is. But again, it's just kind of a wild card out there. And I know that I've talked to some Republican senators, off camera, behind the scenes, who are frustrated when they hear the president talk about, there's going to be election fraud and basically making it less of an incentive for Republicans to get out to the votes. The Republican senators don't like that because, again, you need to get as many people out to the votes as possible. And if a voter feels like his or her vote won't count, why go? So again, that remains to be seen, but there are a lot of very motivated individuals who want to get to the polls and do want to cast their votes. And if you look at how much interest that race has garnered over the past, just week alone, dozens of House members, Republicans and Democrats, have been down campaigning for the respective candidates. Senators have been down there. And so
the money has been
I'm
pouring
fascinated.
in.
Money has been pouring in.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So we will see.
In fact, a very important race in Georgia. Well, Molly, always nice to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Always nice to be here. Thank you, Lana.